I'm Elaine Reyes at the UN headquarters in New York, and this is UN Insider.
Coming up.
Given the scale and scope of destruction and the extent of human suffering, every day counts.
Pushing for solutions for a humanitarian crisis and months of devastating fighting. The latest on the conflict in Gaza.
I cannot stress enough the need to assist Haiti with its efforts to reestablish security.
Renewed calls for help in Haiti amid efforts to usher in new leadership for the Caribbean nation gripped by gang violence. And reducing carbon footprints. A sustainable redesign for an everyday item could help cut down on plastic pollution. Next.
The conflict between Israel and Hamas threatens to extend into a seventh month. UN agencies are still on the ground working to stave off famine and get aid to as many people as possible.
Whilst implementation of some measures is ongoing, further definitive and urgent steps are needed to set the course for a sustained flow of humanitarian and commercial goods into Gaza in terms of volume, need, and reach. Given the scale and scope of destruction and the extent of human suffering, every day counts.
The UN's humanitarian coordinator for Gaza says new aid corridors will soon be operational, but stressed aid workers still need increased access to the territory, especially in the north. Meantime, the UN's Human Rights Office is calling for an investigation into hundreds of bodies buried at hospital sites inside Gaza. Jody Jacobs has the details.
The UN's Human Rights Office says the ongoing fighting in Gaza has caused unspeakable suffering. It says the fighting continues to cause widespread misery, starvation, and disease. But it's the disturbing reports the Human Rights Office says that continue to emerge about mass graves in Gaza that has them concerned. Hundreds of bodies were recovered over the weekend at the Nasser Hospital in central Gaza and at Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City in the north.
Victims had reportedly been buried deep in the ground and covered with waste. Among the deceased were allegedly older people, women, and wounded, while others were found tied with their hands. They were found with their hands tied and stripped of their clothes. In relation to Al-Shifa, reports suggest that there were 30 Palestinian bodies buried in 2 graves in the courtyard of Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City, one in front of the emergency building and the others in front of the dialysis building. The bodies of 12 Palestinians were identified in this case.
In a statement released on Tuesday, the Human Rights Office has decried the ongoing violence, saying the intentional killing of civilians is a war crime. The UN has called for an independent and transparent investigation into the deaths.
Given the prevailing climate of impunity, this should include international investigators. Hospitals are entitled to very special protection under international humanitarian law. And let's be clear, the intentional killing of civilians, detainees, and others who are hors de combat is a war crime. The High Commissioner has said that the unspeakable suffering brought by the fighting, alongside the resulting misery and destruction, starvation and disease, and the risk of wider conflict must end once and for all.
In a statement released by the Israeli army on Tuesday, it says the claim that it buried Palestinian bodies was baseless and unfounded. Jody Jacobs, CGTN, at the United Nations in New York.
For months, the UN's relief agency for Palestinian refugees has faced an uncertain future. Several UNRWA workers were fired amid allegations they were involved in the October 7th attacks on Israel. Dozens of countries suspended funding for the agency while investigations launched, and now the results of an independent probe are in. Shudaja is monitoring the latest developments inside the UN. Deja.
Yes, Elaine. This week, the independent review group, led by former French Foreign Minister Kathleen Colonna, finally released its report. If you remember, in January, Israeli government accused UNRWA staff were involved in Hamas' October 7th attack against Israel. UNRWA then swiftly fired 12 people. Following this incident, about 16 donor countries suspended their funding to UNRWA, including the United States. In February, UN decided to initiate 2 separate investigations. One is this independent review, another one is an internal investigation on the Israeli accusation, which is still underway. The 54-page report stated that UNRWA has established a significant number of mechanisms and procedures to ensure compliance with the humanitarian principles, with emphasis on the principle of neutrality. But neutrality-related issues persist, and it gave 50 recommendations to further enhance its neutrality. I asked the leader of this group, Madame Colonna, on how big the problem of neutrality is for UNRWA.
In your report, you said there's robust framework of neutrality in UNRWA, but there's still neutrality-related issues persists. You just mentioned some curriculums and wrong use of the facilities of UNRWA there. Can you just give us an idea how big of the problem is, you think? Do you think it's a systematic problem? Or how big is this a problem that big enough for donors to stop funding UNRWA or to dismantle UNRWA? How big is the problem? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. The problem is serious enough for the Secretary General to have initiated this review. So it is an existing issue, absolutely. Now, with at the beginning, and including at the beginning of this briefing, stressed the fact that the set of rules, the mechanisms in place, the procedures in place are probably, I said probably, but I'm sure I could say are the most elaborate within the UN system, precisely because it's such a difficult issue to work in such a complex and sensitive environment. Now, what needs to be improved will be improved. And I repeat, I'm confident that implementing these measures will help Iran delivering on its mandate. And I would strongly encourage, again, the international community to be side by side with the agency so it can perform its mission and overcome the challenges when they are there.
Israel said this report is insufficient, but the report confirmed again that Israel has yet to provide supporting evidence of its accusation on UNRWA. Many countries, including China, urges donor countries to resume its funding and stop attacking UNRWA or even the UN.
At this point, the debate for UNRWA's neutrality should come to an end. We urge all countries to resume funding to UNRWA as soon as possible and refrain from using any pretext to impose additional collective punishment on the population of Gaza. Israel has made serious allegations regarding UNRWA's link to terrorism, for which no evidence has been shared. We are concerned about this. China reiterates that without solid evidence, it is unacceptable to attack UNRWA maliciously and even make false accusations against the entire UN system.
50 recommendations. It's not easy, really, to implement them all. How would UNRWA do that? I asked Philip Lazzarini, UNRWA's Commissioner General.
Since we have so many recommendations, 50 recommendations, and you said UNRWA cannot implement them all by itself. Do you have a time frame of all those recommendations? When are you going to implement maybe some of them? It's a phased implementation. Can you explain a little bit?
Yes. Today we will be informing the member states on how we intend to proceed with the 8 set of recommendations. And we will, in the coming weeks, in a staged way, iterated way, be more and more precise about the response plan, about the resource being needed. But we want to kick off the process as from now on. So you will be kept regularly informed.
You just mentioned UNRWA has never been ever under such attack. Last week you were here, you were in the Security Council, you were sitting side by side with the Israeli ambassador, you were literally facing the accusation.
Back at that time, what do you feel when he accused UNRWA of many things?
I keep reminding that the real intent behind the attack of UNRWA is of a political nature, because it has as an objective to strip the Palestinians from the refugee status, to start with in Gaza and East Jerusalem and the West Bank. And basically, this is exactly what we heard at the council from the Israeli ambassador, that indeed this is a stated objective today. And this is also the reason why I want this discussion needs to take place now among the member states, so that we are all collectively aware of what is really at stake if we let UNRWA be dismantled in Gaza.
UNRWA is somehow more than a refugee agency. It gave the refugee status to Palestinians. If UNRWA is dismantled, the refugee abroad, let's say in Lebanon, Syria, or Jordan, will not be able to return. And this is why Israeli Authority always considers UNRWA as a threat to Israel. Now, we're still waiting for UN's OIOS internal report, which directly links to the alleged UNRWA personnel involvement of October 7th attack. Elaine.
Shudija, thanks. There's progress in the effort to bring a transitional government to Haiti. But what impact will it have on the Caribbean nation gripped by gang violence? Thousands have been killed, tens of thousands displaced, and millions of Haitians are struggling to meet basic needs amid a humanitarian crisis.
5.5 million people, including 3 million children, where 2 in every 3 children across the country need humanitarian assistance. In many areas, essential services have collapsed, while people are losing access to food and safe drinking water. And in some communities, life is more dangerous now than it has ever been.
Despite the continued violence, Haiti's new transitional council was sworn in this week in Port-au-Prince. The council and a newly appointed prime minister will govern until new presidential elections can take place. Security will be a top concern for the transitional council, and UN officials are still calling for deployment of a multinational force to help restore calm.
Gang leaders and other spoilers have stated their intention to violently disrupt the current political process, and I cannot stress enough the need to assist Haiti with its efforts to reestablish security.
Let's take a look at some of the other issues topping the UN's agenda.
Women and girls face heightened levels of sexual violence in displacement settings as returnees, refugees, and migrants.
The UN's Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict presented its annual report to the Security Council. It found sexual violence in conflict areas increased by 50% in 2023. The Special Representative urged the Security Council to increase funding to help combat the issue. Top UN officials want the United Kingdom to reconsider its plan to transfer asylum seekers to Rwanda before their claims are heard. Instead, UN officials say steps need to be taken to address the increase in migrants and refugees. They fear the plan will harm human rights and refugee protection. A report from the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization suggests food insecurity and malnutrition have become the new normal. Last year, more than 282 million people globally faced acute hunger due to conflicts, extreme weather, and economic uncertainties. The Gaza Strip and Sudan are at the center of the most severe food crisis. Officials say allowing humanitarian access could rapidly alleviate the crisis.
Thanks to vaccines, smallpox has been eradicated. Polio is on the brink, and many once feared diseases can now be easily prevented.
The last week of April marks World Immunization Week, used to raise awareness about the role vaccines have played in controlling and even eradicating infectious diseases. World health officials say immunization efforts have saved more than 150 million lives over the past 50 years.
Coming up.
The world is aging, And we need to make sure that we focus on the economy of support.
UN Insider.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Years ago, world leaders came together for a landmark agreement that put dignity and human rights at the heart of sustainable development agendas. That includes addressing inequalities like poverty. And today, that effort continues. Next week, the Commission on Population and Development meets here in New York. The panel works to find ways to adapt to modern challenges like the COVID pandemic recovery and climate change while maintaining a focus on human rights. I sat down with Noemi Espinoza. She chairs the Commission on Population and Development. She is also an ambassador at large and Honduras' deputy head of mission to China. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. It's my pleasure.
What do you hope to accomplish as chair on the Commission on Population and Development, and what is your message?
It's an honor for Honduras to chair the Commission on this particular year, which is the 30th anniversary. I'm very honored to have that role. The main takeaway for me is that the issues of the Cairo agenda, as we call it, which are issues of demographic change, are issues of aging, climate change, sustainable development, financing, they are all as relevant as they were 30 years ago, and they can provide solutions for the sustainable development goals, and they can be a beacon towards the Summit of the Future, which is coming up in September.
There are some very big numbers. A recent headline by the medical journal Lancet says that dramatic declines in global fertility rates set to transform global population patterns by the year 2100. What are some of the issues that come along with that?
So there's this enormous demographic transition, and in all regions of the world, some like sub-Saharan Africa and some in Latin America still have very large adolescent and youth populations. But in general, the world is aging, and we need to make sure that we focus on the economy of support, or the matter of care for those aging populations, because the care of young people, of elderly people, usually falls on women. So it's also an issue of gender equality. We need to make sure that there's policies that balance that care towards older populations. It's also an enormous opportunity because, of course, it's a success of 30 years that now people live longer and that there's lower fertility and that people have the family structures that they want to have.
We're also seeing some population and migration shifts as a result of climate change in some regions. Farmers are being impacted, which also leads to food insecurity. They can't make a living. How is all of that being addressed?
Climate change now, which is a reality, and the severity of climate conditions is a reality, and it is one of the factors that motivate people to migrate. In Central America, for example, where Honduras is seated, we have what is called a dry corridor, which just means that there's very arid land, and that has caused a lot of impact on agriculture. It makes farmers reevaluate what they can do, because if they can't grow their crops anymore, they migrate to the urban centers, but also migrate out of the country. So as the tropical areas get hotter, people will start to move for these very reasons.
Much of what you do involves improving the lives of women and girls. Honduras, as we know, has a female president. You are involved in higher political office and public service. Talk to us a little bit about your path and what advice you have for young women hoping to do what you do.
Yes, and I'm very proud of having one of the only 26 female heads of state or government in the world. So Honduras, President Xiomara Castro is one of 26 in the entire world. And it is a real inspiration to women and girls, especially in Honduras, when you look, at her and say, I can be the president someday. And I myself have followed the path of the generations before me in Honduras who gave me equal opportunities. I think the young women's movement is something that we need to keep a close eye on and nurture and make sure that they have opportunities and education, because they will be the ones that can bring the world forward.
Honduras and China recently celebrated 1 year of establishing diplomatic relations. President Castro visited China as well. Things are off to a pretty fast start. We saw this multi-million-dollar infrastructure deal agreed between both countries recently. Is this just the beginning? Talk to us about ties and how they're progressing.
This is a wonderful opportunity for both countries. It's a great decision that was made by President Castro, Foreign Minister Enrique Reina. It's based on our principles of foreign policy of sovereignty, a foreign policy of collaboration, much like the Chinese foreign policy. We are extremely happy to be partners with China. We established these relations based on the One China principle, which we fully believe in. And I think that there's a lot for both countries. For us, China, just by the size and the opportunities that it offers, it can help us develop so much. But also China in Honduras can see a friend that opens the doors to other Latin American countries. And that's what the relationship has been. I'm the deputy head of mission at the embassy in Beijing. And as soon as I finish the CPD, I will be going back to Beijing. And I have been there already, and it's truly exciting to see that relationship consolidate itself. And I think it's going to be a wonderful opportunity for both countries going forward.
You mentioned both countries learning and taking things from each other. When you set that against what the United Nations offers and the size of the countries and multilateralism, how does that play a role?
I think also the multilateral system is the only option that we have to look at these world problems like what we were talking about, migration and climate change, because it's the fact that one country, one vote, and we all sit here together and can have a conversation about how to address those challenges. It's the only way. Migration doesn't, it's a trans-border issue. It requires the international community. Climate change does not know borders. So the United Nations is key, and then having partners like China, who clearly, China is a very powerful country in the world, but also in the United Nations. It's one of the permanent 5 members. It's a very big country, but their friendship towards us enables us to also be more representative and to have a better role, because we have that friendship with China, which is based on respect. It's a very respectful relationship on the side of China towards Honduras.
Ambassador Espinosa, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Coming up.
Like everyone else, I've seen what we've done to the ocean. We've used it as a dumping ground.
UN Insider.
Holding guns. Word protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time? Not at all.
Excellency, thank you very much for your time. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Monday marked Earth Day, and the UN is calling for urgent action to protect the planet. An estimated 1 million plant and animal species are facing the threat of extinction. The Earth loses 10 million hectares of forest every year. That's an area the size of Iceland. And our oceans are 30% more acidic than they were in pre-industrial times. Plastic pollution is one of the biggest threats to our planet. The UN estimates 17 million metric tons of plastic ended up in the oceans in 2021. That could be 2 to 3 times more by the year 2040. The problem inspired one professor to take a new approach to make an everyday item completely biodegradable. Frances Coe explains.
Stephen Mayfield is a true Californian through and through.
I grew up on the water here. I grew up on the water up in Los Angeles and have spent my entire life here. I am a surfer, I'm a fisherman, I'm a scuba diver. I love all of those things.
That love of the water is driving his passion to save it.
Like everyone else, I've seen what we've done to the ocean. We've used it as a dumping ground for the last, hundreds of years, but specifically for the last 50 years. It's just a garbage bin that we throw stuff into.
So Mayfield turned to a potential solution in his lab at the University of California, San Diego. The answer lying in algae.
They were the original organisms. You would not be on this planet, and I would not be on this planet if it weren't for those.
Mayfield is a distinguished professor of biology and has studied green algae for decades. The organism's a powerhouse against climate change by sucking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere.
About 3 billion years ago, the atmosphere was about close to 80% carbon dioxide. No organisms could live on it. Photosynthetic organisms showed up, figured out how to turn CO2 and sunlight into chemical energy. So it turned the atmosphere from 80% carbon dioxide to now 20% oxygen. And that's why you and I can live and breathe.
Now, Mayfield's scientific senses have given algae a modern purpose as a main material for shoes.
And shoes have that kind of nice sweet spot where they're large volume of them, because there's about 25 billion with a B, right? There's only 8 billion of us on the planet. Somehow we make 3 pairs of shoes per person per year.
Through his company, Blueview, Mayfield created what he calls the world's first fully biodegradable shoes, from top to bottom. Algae is grown in Mayfield's lab. Their oils extracted and used as a basis to mold the shoe's soles. The upper half woven with all natural ingredients of hemp, cotton, and eucalyptus. Altogether, the shoe is a plant-based alternative to conventional footwear, which is often made of harmful plastics that linger in the environment.
Because they stay around for 1,000 years. Hey, when you throw those there, they tend to stay there forever.
Not these shoes. Here's what they look like breaking down inside these compost containers.
It takes between 7 and 8 months for our shoe to completely biodegrade.
During his 6 years of research, Mayfield and his team found when the shoes were tossed in the ocean, organisms fed off of them, recycling the algae back into the ecosystem. Mayfield's invention now creating a footprint, helping protect his beloved oceans for years to come. Frances Coe, CGTN, San Diego.
I'm Elaine Reyes at UN headquarters in New York. Thanks for being a UN Insider.